Good morning. My name's Lloyd Swartz, and I'm a registered former sex offender, and my family appears on the registry in the state of New Mexico for events that occurred over 25 years ago when I was 16 and 17 years old. I've lost a business, I've lost a marriage along the way, and I no longer feel like, at times, that I am a part of the land of the free. I receive online communications as well as phone calls nearly daily from organizers across the state and individuals. And a lot of times what I'm hearing is, oh my God, this hideous bill just passed in our state. Now what do I do? And my answer has to be, find a way to find tens of thousands of dollars now to hire attorneys to overturn what was just done. And that's not the answer people want to hear. And the bottom line is it's a lot cheaper to go to your legislature. Everybody complains about how much it costs and they have to take time off from work. I guarantee you it's a lot cheaper than the $120,000 it'll probably take to go to a state Supreme Court type situation. There seems to be in this movement a huge disconnect between our members and political reality. It seems like a lot of times people are waiting around for that silver bullet to come solve all the problems. That Supreme Court decision that just tosses the registry away forever, or that state level Supreme Court decision that undoes all the bad things that have been done to your family. There's no silver bullet out there. This movement is about lots of little changes. It's about litigation, it's about education, and most importantly, it's about legislation. If you think things are hunky-dory in your world, you've got a job, you've got a family, you're doing all right, maybe you're not doing great, but you're satisfied, then this is not the place for you to be. Because, first of all, it's unrealistic. Things will get worse. They always do. Many of you that are in this room can attest to that. You know, some of you had registries where they had risk assessment systems and they were only putting a handful of people on the internet. And all of a sudden you went to everybody life on the internet overnight. Things will get worse. You will lose your job. Your family will lose their job. You will lose your home. It's just a matter of time. So the idea of exposing yourself through lobbying somehow that's going to, expose yourself, and you're going to lose this. You're going to lose this stuff anyways. You're better off becoming involved in lobbying and standing up for your rights. Politicians and courts are not going to solve our problems. We're going to solve our problems. I also hear another common theme I hear after bad legislation is passed. Well, Lloyd, now we're ready to write some legislation to undo what they did. If you were not able to kill that bad legislation, there is no way in hell you're going to turn around the next year and sponsor legislation. If you heard the state legislator talk yesterday, he's like, killing bills, that's nothing. Piece of cake. Now, passing bills, it takes years and thousands of things have to go right. And that's the lesson to take away from today, is it's easy to kill bad public policy bills. It is tough to reform laws that are already on the books. So the first place you have to start as an organizer is killing bills. And I'll tell you, first lawmaker I talked to in New Mexico said, Lloyd, I don't want to talk to you. You spend the next 2 years killing legislation, and then you come back and talk to me. So that's what we did. We spent the first 2 years just killing things. We came back the third year. We introduced 4 bills, one of which that particular person sponsored, and it made it all the way to the governor's veto pen. So, passing new reform legislation takes years of preparation, expert lobbyists, passionate lawmakers, long-term relationships, comprehensive strategy, cunning, and a hell of a lot of luck. Before you ever do a single thing in this movement, you must become 100% involved in your legislature. Everything else must take a back seat. I see new organizers, my God, I got to get a website, man. I don't care about the website. I don't care about I don't care about anything. First thing you got to do is get to your legislature. Worry about the website later. Worry about your incorporation later. Put all those things on a bed. You worry about your reintegration program that you want to launch. All that needs to come second, because if they're passing new bad laws, you're going to be set back every year, and you're just going to be drowning. Once you can turn the tide of bad legislation, then you can be far more successful, and you can move on to other things. Keep in mind, this workshop is better suited for those that already have somewhat of a basic understanding of the legislative process, and I think most of you do. But I'm not going to be so much delving into the basics of how, who, and why bills are created, and how the process moves in your state legislature. So this is more about, again, killing bad legislation. So I have a PowerPoint here. I'm going to go ahead and get started with that. So the first thing I have is, what is lobbying? And there are a lot of negative connotations that come to mind for some people. I mean, I know we've got some left-wing liberal nuts in this movement as an example. Oh, lobbyists, they're evil lobbyists. They screw everything up. The bottom line of lobbyists is the voice of the people. And one thing I found when I got into lobbying initially, that one of the big problems is not that there's too many lobbyists, but many times there's not enough. Oh, sure, the hospitals and the big corporations, such as, again, a hospital, I'll use that because that's something that's common lately, will have, 50 lobbyists there. But you'll have 100 criminal justice bills, and nobody's speaking for those bills or against those bills, depending on whether they're good or bad bills. So the biggest problem we have is not enough lobbyists, particularly for what we're doing. And that's really the bottom line. Lobbyists are the voice for most citizens, and the reason that is not everybody can take time off from work and spend a lot of time doing lobbying, but you have to find a way to be able to do that.
Lloyd, before you leave that slide, it's hard to read the words you have highlighted.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's all right. Would you just tell us what they are?
Yeah, sure. It's lobbying is the intention of influencing decisions made by legislators, and officials in the government by individuals, other legislators, constituents, or advocacy groups. And that is just kind of the technical definition of lobbying. But the key thing to remember is it's the voice of the people. It's how most people's voices are heard. Citizen lobbying, and what I mean by citizen lobbying is just simply not professional lobbying. Supplements professional lobbying if you have a professional lobbying program. Used for committee meetings is the best use for citizen lobbying. We'll get a little more into that in a little bit. Casting votes by phone or mail. And kind of what I mean by that is, when you show up at a committee meeting and raise your hand for or against a bill, or when you call, or when you email, you're essentially casting a vote. The legislator's aide goes, God, we had 800 phone calls against this bill. Well, that's basically 800 votes against. Well, how many people called for it? One. Oh, really? So it's essentially a means of casting an informal vote. Citizen lobbying can be used for individual lobbying, of legislators. We'll get into that a little more. Best used in support of killing bills, not drafting and sponsoring. So the fortunate thing is, the first thing you need to do is kill bad bills. And fortunately, that's the best use for general citizen lobbying. Anybody in your group can really support that effort. When you get into drafting, sponsoring, that sort of thing, then you need to really have a good team of smart people, and preferably a lead person that is really good at lobbying and good at what they do. So preparing to kill. So you need to know what is coming along before the session. So many times I hear people, not even 2/3 of the way through the session, hey, there's a bill making its way through. I didn't know about it. You've got to know what's coming. What that means is you need to be active year-round. In some states, you may have interim committee meetings that meet separately throughout the year. You may have sex offender management board meetings. You may have sentencing commission meetings. Any of these meetings that deal with sex offender issues, and I checked the agenda for a meeting just as I was up in my motel room, as a matter of fact, coming up in 2 weeks, to make sure there was none of these issues on there. You've got to make sure that you participate in all those meetings so you know in advance and you can start preparing and strategizing. You don't want to go into a session with 12 bills and just totally unprepared. Know who is sponsoring related legislation historically. It's just kind of so you can keep an eye out for them and kind of maybe better understand their intentions and maybe get to know them better. Research who sponsored the bills pertaining to your issues in your state. Are there common denominators? Common denominators, there may be people that regularly sponsor bills that are positive for sex offenders or negative, and it gives you something to look for. Another side note on that, a lot of times negative legislation in our state, everyone that's introduced negative legislation has been put in a doghouse by us. So one of the things we see is that they always go, the Department of Public Safety or the Attorney General or whoever's sponsoring bills, a lot of times will go to a freshman lawmaker and say, this is good public policy. Will you introduce this? So a lot of times you're looking for a freshman lawmaker as the potential victim for introducing this bad public policy. And you must prepare factual talking points before proposed bills. Now, I noted there may be several sets of talking points. And what I mean by that, there may be a set that you want to submit to the legislators you're talking about. There may be a set you may want to use in your committee hearings. There may be a set you might want to issue to the Legislative Council when they're doing their fiscal analysis of the bill. And there could be just various strategies you might want to employ. You may want to have some of your citizen lobbyists go out there and talk more generalities than specifics about a particular bill. So you might produce a different set of talking points and email that out to the folks on your mailing list. So preparation continued. Know where you stand on the issues. Be prepared to answer tough questions. Sometimes it goes pretty easy. Sometimes a lawmaker will come up with a really tough question that really catches you off guard. You kind of don't know what to expect. You're not likely to get a lot of questions about recidivism. Most of them know the answer to that question already. But you just never know. I mean, I was the expert witness this last session for a ban on residency restrictions statewide. And a very technical legal question came up that I mostly knew the answer to, and I tried to answer the judiciary, but I went back and researched it heavily and that was for public affairs. So I figured judiciary, well, hell, they're gonna hit me up really hard on this technical home rule legal question. So I did a lot of research, came with a stack of paper, and they didn't even bother to ask me about it. So you really have to be prepared. Lobbying is a lot of times thinking on your feet, but being prepared to answer really tough questions. And some of the tougher questions are like, don't the victims have a say? Don't the victims have a right? So, and that's a very tough question to deal with. So you really need to think through those questions and be prepared. Know your opposition. What other groups will oppose you? Reaching out to those groups is obviously important, but knowing who's going to oppose you and how you might be able to work with them. Collaborate and create coalitions. I know you heard that in the last couple of days from other folks that talked about lobbying. Very important. We generally collaborate with ACLU, New Mexico Criminal Defense Lawyers Association, there's a women's, I'm trying to think, Women's Justice Policy Project. There's they have that Southern Center for Poverty. Well, now they're opening up affiliates in different states, and they're very vocal for us. And literally, all I gotta do is say this, and give her a thing and ahead of the meeting, and she'll do it. Or I'll say, be in this meeting. Here's what you need to say, and she'll show up and do it. So it shows more of a diverse groups supporting, or in this case, opposing legislation. Obtain a legal analysis for proposed bills. I know this is tough for some of you. I have a really good, smart paralegal in my state. You need to find somebody legally in your state that will support. Not only, you have to have two analysis. You have to analyze a bill based upon the factual issues. We don't need this because recidivism's low. Okay. But you also need to analyze, are there constitutional issues? Nearly every state in here has passed unconstitutional laws, including my state, before we were involved. But if you can point out those constitutional issues, that is a great way to kill a bill. If you call anything into question constitutionally, you can usually kill it. The problem is you're saying, well, gosh, why did they pass all these unconstitutional laws? Probably because nobody was there to back them up and say, hey, this is unconstitutional. So you need a legal analysis, and that goes way beyond the Constitution. It can go in depth into other issues related to the law in your state. So you need somebody that's good at doing that. Identify the likely committees for your bills. Obviously, you need to know what the workflow is for your bill. In New Mexico, it goes through two committees on either side. It's always Public Affairs, and it's always Judiciary. We know that. In your state, it may be different. Map out a legislative timeline for bills you're sponsoring. That's obviously for sponsoring bills. That slipped in there from an old presentation. So if you cannot stop it, be prepared to amend it. I think you also heard that yesterday from the legislator. When you're thinking about strategy for killing bills, the best thing you do is obviously table a bill and kill a bill. But the next best thing is to say, God, this thing's going to get through one way or another. How can we modify this bill to make it more palatable? And I believe it was Illinois Voices I spoke to this session about doing that. They knew something was going to get through. There was a huge tidal wave. They couldn't stop it, but they attempted to make amendments that would be more palatable. And typically, you're going to be the one writing those amendments. You need to generate your own language. I mean, the legalese doesn't have to be perfect, but the spirit of the language that you write is what's important. Effectively advocating a kill. So know all aspects of your issues, research all the terminology, have all the studies as backup, know what those studies say. Again, as you heard the last couple of days, don't hand them the full, complete studies, but you need to be knowledgeable. They're looking for you for knowledge. They have sometimes thousands of bills a session, and they can't know everything about most of those bills. So you've got to be the knowledgeable, you've got to be the go-to person for information. Research the opposing party issues, figure out how you might be able to address those. Research major court rulings and how you might be able to use that. Say, you know what, email identifiers were just overturned in our neighboring state as violating the First Amendment rights. You cannot add these, So you could use those various court rulings to in your advantage. Research the history of any related legislation passed by the legislature or lobbying. So you need to understand the history. As an example, everybody's always looking for that magical AWA compliance bill, and I get a lot of calls, and they're like, well, yeah, no, we're not doing AWA in my state. Well, what do you got this session? Well, ask them for emails or ask them for cars. They want to drop it down to 3 days, and they want to do a 25-year tier. I'm like, that is an AWA compliance bill. So you need to look at the history, look at what they've been trying to do, and know where they've been and where they're trying to head. Know all the current laws that pertain to your issues. So you need to know all the current SORNA laws that exist on the books, obviously. Okay, the next item is effective communication. Know your legislators. What are their interests? Do you have, common interest? I mean, do you have somebody that knows somebody on a registry? Are you a veteran and they're a veteran? That type of thing, so that you can build relationships with them. What other types of bills are they sponsoring? Are you or someone you know a constituent? Interesting thing about that, we heard a lot about how if you're not a constituent, you're not treated seriously. And I'm going to kind of disagree a little bit with that. At the federal level, it's a little more important because of just the nature of the federal level. At the state level, it's not as important. Sure, it's good if you are their constituent, but the bottom line is these laws go through one or two critical committees. When you go to the Judiciary Committee head and talk about sex offender legislation, he's not going to so much care that you're not his constituent. And the reason is because he knows you have to talk to him. He knows it's his job to vet out these bills. So that becomes not as big an issue when you're talking about a specific issue and you're talking to the folks that are going to be the ones that are going to be in charge of the committees. Lobby one-on-one or pairs max. This is a kind of a hard lesson learned, and I know a number of other people have learned this in here. You don't want to invade a lawmaker's office with a whole group of people, all going in there to tell their personal stories. And there's a few reasons for this. First of all, sometimes conflicting messages are given, but more often than not, there's just not enough time. And it's also just, it's a thing where people feel more comfortable talking one-on-one. It's kind of like if you go into a room and you're going into, let's say you've got a lawsuit going on and they have 10 lawyers and you have one lawyer sitting there, you're going to feel pretty uncomfortable. So do you share other concerns in common with that lawmaker? And again, I think we heard a little bit about this yesterday. Everybody may have different concerns about this particular issue. Some lawmakers may be more concerned about the Romeo and Juliet issue, which we don't even have in our state, so that's not even an issue for us. Some people may be more concerned about the ex post facto or the constitutional issues. Another lawmaker might be more concerned about the morality of what we're doing. Some other lawmakers have stated they're concerned about the fact that these laws are eventually going to, and there's some evidence it's already doing it, increase crime. So you need to find out what really, really what gets their goat in particular. Create your concise message in advance. So you heard this yesterday too. You need to know what your message is. Keep it brief, to the point, informative, but it's really important you create that message. If you send mixed messages to lawmakers, just as you heard, they communicate and they're like, well, but this guy told me this, and this guy told me that. That's a real huge problem, and it's happened to us. We were able to verify bad votes because we know that happened in our state, and we were able to identify that. Limit legislation-specific lobbying to your lead lobbyists controlling the message. If you get down to a point, and this is more critical for sponsoring a bill, which we're not talking about, but if you get down to the point where you're down to the wire and you're looking for votes, or you're looking for no votes for a bill, and you're targeting very technical, specific areas of a bill, it tends to be better to have a lead appointed person do the work. That way there's not a mix-up in the message, that there's not mixed signals sent. So again, using your group to lobby is better in committee, general lobbying in advance, and that sort of thing. General issue lobbying. But when it gets down to, you're getting down to the wire, and bills in committee, and you're trying to accumulate votes, you really should have somebody take the lead. One or two people take the lead that you can trust. So on communication, continued constant updates to the membership. They're just going to have to get used to it during the legislative session. You need to be sending out emails typically once a day, maybe every other day, and some days it may be 2 or 3 times a day. Committee meetings, as you know, are very fickle. I've told everybody to be there at 9 o'clock in the morning, and at 7:30 in the morning I send an email, don't be there. They're going in a caucus. And then at 2 o'clock, I said, I'll be there at 2:30. And then sent another email, said, no, be there at 5, you know. And there's just no way of avoiding that. You try to make the best decisions. You try to feel out, okay, they say they're going to go off the floor at 2. Are they really? But you don't. In the end, you don't know. So it's real important to keep your membership updated so that they know how they can participate. Create your talking points for the membership as we said. Failure is an option. And the greatest route to failure is, I kind of got a list here, relying on email or relying on phone. And a little bit more specifically with email, there are a lot of lawmakers during a session that do not read their email once the session gets started because they don't have time. If they're getting 1,200 emails a week, they're not reading them. So if you're relying on email, good luck. Phone, you call on the phone, you're going to talk to an aide and you're going to cast a vote. That's all you're doing. Is it useful? Yes, it can be. But I will tell you in this last session, we had 4 bills that we sponsored, and I didn't ask my people to do either one once. I only asked them to show up because that was what was more important. If I felt like I needed that push at the last minute through letter writing, through emails, through phone calls, I would have used it. But honestly, you definitely don't want to rely on that. Relying on the media to get the truth out. Wow. We use the media, we have to use the media, but it is a double-edged sword. And so many times, if it bleeds, it leads, and they come back, and when you think you've got a good intention, if you go speak to the media, sometimes bad things happen. I had an incident myself a few years ago where I went and spoke to the media. The sheriff carried my entire criminal conviction record from 1987 to the newspaper and gave it to them and said that I was somehow lying to them, and somehow I claimed to be a Romeo and Juliet when technically I really wasn't. And so you really have to be careful with the media, but don't rely on them to get the truth out. If you can form a great relationship with some media people and work with them, we've got a couple newspapers now that are pretty good, and we kind of trust them, that's fine, but don't rely on that. Missing any critical committee meetings. You miss one meeting, the bill, that's over. It's all over. That's it. You're done. That's probably the most common mistake I see made among affiliates. You say, well, we can't make all the meetings. Well, you have to. I don't care how you do it. You have to make all the meetings. Now, doesn't mean you personally necessarily do, but somebody from your group needs to make all the meetings. The other thing about missing committee meetings, not only will the bill potentially almost likely pass, but you'll also have a vote that is much more in favor of the bill. If you had been there, maybe it would have passed anyways, but maybe the vote would have been, 8-4. And you weren't there, it went 8-0. That builds momentum, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But once a bill has momentum, it makes it a lot harder to stop. So you want to make sure bills that you're fighting don't have momentum. Not filling the committee rooms, you want to have that room filled. They want to see that people are so passionate that 20, 30 people, men, women, children, registrants, non-registrants, different types of activists all showed up on this very important bill to put a stop to it. Sending mixed messages is the next greatest way to kill legislation. The experience I had a couple experiences recently. One was some of the members in our group that went to do the individual lobbying before a committee meeting simply didn't understand what we were trying to do. And so they just got the lawmaker totally confused. And then you get the folks that go out there and deliver that mixed message of get the hardcores, get the serial pedophiles. And that is something as a movement we have to get away from. Somebody actually in this audience asked me to even address this issue. We stand for everybody that has completed their probation, their parole, their sentence, whatever that sentence may be. And we have to recognize that all the research shows that not only does registration not work, but it increases sexual victimization, and it actually endangers society. And it's important that you tell lawmakers this. It's not just about sex offender civil rights, it's about public safety. The serial pedophile and rapist is going to be in prison. He can't stop himself. He's not going to go 5 or 10 years on parole or probation. The statistics show that that person is not. He's the, as we like to call, the saber-toothed tiger. He's the part of that 3%. And let's face it, the majority of the 3% that reoffends are minor offenders, like peeping toms and flashers and things like that. They're the so we're looking for, with registration, is the saber-toothed tiger. And I hear a lot of organizers say, well, it's okay to go after the saber-toothed tiger with these policies. That's the wrong message. These policies are never going to catch the saber-toothed tiger. And most of those saber-toothed tigers are going to be locked up in prison anyways because of the heinous things they're doing. Using your legislative website depends upon the state, but typically these days it's a pretty powerful tool. Some states are better than others, as I've helped a few of you and found that some of your websites pretty much stink. But many of them are very good. Identify your state legislators. You can identify which one you're constituent of. Identify the committees they're on. And we'll look at here in a little bit, we'll look at my state website if we can bring it up. And just so we can see kind of how it works, at least in our state. Identify the committees, obviously committee members, research legislation. I know typically, like on our website, you can go back all the way to 1996 and search for legislation. I can go back and look at the entire progression of SORNA, except for the original SORNA bill passed in 95, because that was before it went online. Monitor legislation. Many times there's different types of tools, alerts, committee agendas and schedules, all sort of things. Another key aspect of websites, usually they use lots of codes when you look at the bill for the progression through the legislature, and they use a lot of crazy codes. A, B, C, W, U, A. I don't know what the hell that means. What you need to do is try to find where they've got those codes stored. Usually I'm in a list somewhere, and print that out, tape it to the side of your desk. So you know that TBLD is tabled and withdrawn as WDRDW or whatever. Those are simple ones, but believe me, they get pretty complex and pretty crazy. Monitor activities over the web. Now, I don't know how many states have that, but we actually have live broadcasting. The only person to ever speak out against the registry in New Mexico, who is a Republican running for state representative or national or federal representative for New Mexico, believe it or not, actually got cameras brought into the committee rooms and into the onto the chamber floors. So that's wonderful. So if you don't need to be up there that day, but maybe there's something you want to see going on the floor, you can monitor that. Or if you can't be up there and you've got people up there in lieu of you, you can still watch the committee meeting at work in a little window or something. So if you have that, definitely take advantage of that. Now, I said I really wouldn't get into the basic legislative process, but I did leave one slide in here. Typically, a bill is introduced either on the Senate or the House side. It goes to the signed to the two committees or one committee in some states for that bill. It goes through those committees, then it goes to a floor vote, then it goes over to the other side and goes to one or two committees on that side, depending on your state, and then it goes to another vote. That's a long process. That you could see where there's, so you typically have 4 committees where you can kill this bill along the way. That's 4 opportunities to get rid of that bad legislation. But to also give you an idea how hard it is to actually successfully sponsor legislation, because you also have to overcome getting through all those committees successfully and then having the governor sign or approve the bill, not veto it. Sponsorship, why it matters. Again, this more is appropriate to sponsoring bills, but Many times it helps to understand, again, why somebody's sponsoring that bill. Maybe they have a victim in their family. So you know how to, maybe that'll help you better understand how to approach them. It's many times a partisan issue. I'm a Republican, and typically Republicans are 95% wrong on this issue. What can I say? They are. It's just the way it is. So it really helps to understand, and if you know it's that, then you can come up with some strategy. Interim committees, this is not something every state has. Better legislatures do have them. The idea is that you have a kind of an informal committee, interim committee meetings that are held throughout the year, usually starting in the summer. And they're a way of having a much less pressured environment to vet bills out ahead of time. And many times if you're sponsoring legislation, you can even go into these and see what kind of reaction you get. So obviously, when you have opposing bills, many times they will run through these interim committee meetings. This is a great place to network. It's a great place to know what's going to be coming up. Find out what problems, usually they're public comments. Of course, you're going to comment, but you're also going to hear what other people's comments are. So you can learn a lot. These interim committee meetings are important. They have to be just like the session. If it's about your issue, you have to be there. And in New Mexico, typically they make up a schedule in May for these interim committee meetings during the year, and usually it'll just be one of those that they're having. They'll have sex offender issues. So you don't have to go to all 6 or 8 of them throughout the year, just the one that's going to really apply. Start with killing bills before moving on to sponsoring. Tabling a bill. So tabling a bill is kind of the holy grail. That's really where you want to get to. You want that bill tabled. Once a bill's been tabled in committee, it really can't go anywhere. It would take an act of Congress practically. Basically, what has to happen is a bill sponsor has to come back, go to the committee chair and go, you know what? I've talked to the other side. I've come to a compromise, or we've come up with this great new twist. They got to come up with something really amazing at that point. So tabling a bill is the holy grail, and that's what you really want to get. You can get other things, such as a no recommendation vote. That really doesn't help you a whole lot because it just moves on. So that's what you're really looking for. Or getting it killed on the floor by a vote. But the problem is, once a sex offender legislation has passed through a couple committees and goes to a floor vote, it's going to pass. Let's face it. Some folks may vote against it, but in the end, it's going to pass. So it's got to be done in committee. Consent calendars, use of and opposition of. So they have these little things called consent calendars. They're used both on the floor and are used in committees. And the idea is to speed up the process. We think these 12 bills today are non-controversial. Okay? So we're just going to blast through them. Residency restrictions for sex offenders statewide, SB 122. How do we vote? Yes, boom. And it literally will go that fast. Obviously, if you're opposing a bill, you don't want that. So what you need to do is make sure that you've been there, your voices have been loud enough that bill is now controversial. If it's controversial and they know it, they're not going to do that. They're not going to do it. It's not going to go on a consent calendar. I have seen sex offender bills now in my state are all automatically considered controversial, all move to the bottom of the pack, unless we're out there moving something that's positive. And they're all considered controversial. But in many states, they may not be, particularly if you haven't been very active in your legislature. So you want to make your bills that you're fighting controversial so they don't make it onto any type of consent calendar. And if you do see one of those bills on a consent calendar, because many times there will be a schedule for your committee meeting. At the top, they may have the consent bills, and you need to make a ruckus with the committee chair. Emotion versus fact. This is something really important to keep in mind, is that many times what got us into this crisis? Was it fact? No. Was it data? No. Emotion. dead children. I mean, who doesn't hurt for dead children? Interestingly enough, and this is something that a lot of people will probably disagree with me on, it works for our side too. I've had members of my group stand up and say, I'm a registered sex offender, and here's my story in committee. And I've had lawmakers 9 months, a year later say, God, who was that guy brave enough to stand up and tell that? We'll talk about another issue, another event later here on where that was the pivotal turning point, was the emotion in the room. And really, and I'll go, let me take a step back to an interim committee meeting, would have been 3 summers ago. That was the turning point for sex offender legislation in New Mexico forever. We had a wife break down in front of the committee crying up in front of the committee. One of the senators came out and hugged her. Nothing was ever the same in our state again. Emotion does work. Now, of course, they're not necessarily going to feel sorry for sex offenders, but if you can portray the emotion of what these laws are doing to people, there is a huge human toll, and wives, children, families, and believe me, they're not numb to that. And frankly, most lawmakers do have strong constitutional moral values, and these laws violate constitutional and moral values. The idea that we're going to punish people for the rest of their lives beyond the term of their sentence, that is immoral. So if you could bring that emotion out, it works. And again, we talked about partisan leadership a little bit, and depending on where you're at in your session, a lot of times you need to reach out to your leadership, to your majority leaders and whips, and talk to them and ask them to not support the legislation as it comes before them. So that's a little more complicated, but one of the things too is many times is they're the ones that bring the bills up, and they actually on the floor, and they have a choice. So keep in mind, in committee, the committee chair dictates what bill comes up when. Okay, so if you make it controversial or you tell him it's bad public policy, he'll keep scooting that sucker to the bottom of the list as long as he can. I've seen bills sit there for months. He can do that. The same thing can happen on the floor. If it's coming to a floor vote, if the majority leader thinks that it's bad public policy or it's a bad bill, he can keep scooting it down for a period of time. There comes a point where all things must come to bear. But that's very helpful. Because along with tabling a bill, probably the next greatest way that you can kill legislation is just stall it. Don't make them vote against a sex offender bill. Oh my God, they got to get reelected. But if you can get them to simply get the key people that are in charge to stall that bill long enough, the committee chairs, the majority leaders, minority leaders, that sort of thing, get them to stall that bill long enough, then who cares? It dies anyways on the calendar. So that's your next most effective way. So unconventional lawmaking techniques, these techniques contradict traditional lawmaking, because they can bypass committee deliberation, avoid public hearing and discussion on changes or inclusions on major bills. This becomes really much more troubling at the federal level, to be honest. There's all kinds of sneaky things they can do at the federal level that we are not talking about. But anyways, these techniques can be used for and against us. If you're going to use unconventional techniques in our favor, then you need to have relationships built, because before lawmakers go out on a limb, they're going to have to know they trust you and you're going to be there to back them up. Unscheduled committee meetings, many times, sometimes innocently. Sometimes things just get so backed up that they decide at 8 o'clock at night, they came off the floor, that they're so backed up that they need to go into committee. It wasn't on the schedule. You didn't know about it. That's why you have to follow literally 24 hours a day, 7 days a week during your whole legislative session and know exactly what's going on. You need to know whether those folks are getting on the train headed home that night or whether they're going into committee. So sometimes it can be innocent, but sometimes it's not so innocent. Sometimes they have a number of controversial bills, and the chair will purposely call a meeting at an oddball hour. And I have seen them call these committee meetings closed as well. It's rare, at least in my state, but it does happen. Usually they'll use the excuse, well, we heard that sex offender bill already, and there were public comments already. So we're going to have another committee hearing to talk about, but we're not going to have public comments. We're not going to have anybody here. So that kind of thing can happen. Stalling, we talked about. Amending bills, we talked about as an alternative. And merging bills. We did some very creative brinkmanship this last session. The other side had 3 or 4 bills. I don't even remember how many they had. One of their bills, we went to their sponsor and said that we had a better bill, and we just substitute instead, so we ran the same bill on both sides, which is called a mirror bill. We approached another bill sponsor and said our bill is better, and we tried to merge the 2 bills. We were unsuccessful at that time. But so there's many different kind of techniques you can use in killing or at least modifying legislation out there. So lobbying strategies that are proven. We heard a little bit about letter writing and the best way to do that. And again, I'm really reluctant and hesitant to talk about that much because you don't want to rely on that. There's no substitute from being there in person. And you can write 2,000 letters. That piece of sex offender legislation will still pass if you're not there. So while it's positive, and you may have people on probation and parole that can't travel to the Capitol, that's fine to use folks to do that. But just keep in mind that that's no substitute for effective lobbying in person. Phone calls, obviously individual lobbying. And when I say individual lobbying, if you know something's coming bad next session, don't wait till the session to start meeting with lawmakers. Start setting up appointments during the summer. And I think you heard a little bit about how insane their schedules are during the session. Well, the rest of the year, their schedules are insane, but they're not that insane. So it's much easier to meet with them. I mean, there's several lawmakers I meet with every 3 to 6 weeks. We have coffee, we have lunch, we have dinner, what have you. Very easy to do when you're not during a legislative session. And a couple other comments I want to make on that. When the legislature starts, they're usually a little bit less busy. They usually it's kind of a, well, we're waiting for bills to come out of committee, so it's kind of just, yeah. So typically it's much easier to get in to see lawmakers individually early on in a session. Once things are kicking into overdrive and deadlines are coming up, introduction deadlines, whatever's, as bills start to come out of committee and they need to be addressed, then their schedules will cramp up a whole lot more. So keep that in mind. Individual lobbying toward the end of a legislative session almost becomes hopeless. And typically, I know you heard a little bit of advice here on this issue, but one of the things I like to do is I'll usually schedule several appointments if I'm going to go up and lobby. But I'll schedule them way apart because of the scheduling issues. Then in between, I'll just go bang on doors and see if I can find people that just happen to be there. And a lot of times that works. A lot of times you can fill in all your gaps with just getting lucky. And again, don't be afraid to talk to lawmakers anywhere. I've had great conversations in the urinals. It works. It's about catching them where you can catch them, honestly. Letter writing, again, just real quickly, who you are. And that was mentioned yesterday about contact information. That happens constantly. We actually had some group, we still don't know who they are. Supposedly it's a sex offender advocacy group in New Mexico that opposed us because they're ignorant and didn't know what we were doing. And one of the things is all the letters they wrote, they didn't put who they were. They didn't put their name on the stupid thing. I can tell you where those go. If you're anonymous, they go in a trash can. He politely said they would go in some sort of file. They go in the trash can. If you're not using your name on something, your real name, who you are, you have no credibility with a lawmaker. So keep that in mind. Again, brief. Let them know what you want to do about the problem or the bad bill. Vote no because of these reasons. Keep it to a page. Again, mass emails are not effective, as you've already heard. Personal phone calls. And again, keep in mind, this is one thing folks getting started in this forget, is that your local representative is probably useless. That's just the bottom line. You may be like, I know the Republicans are your problem, but there's so-and-so down, and this conversation happened. There's 2 Republicans down in the conservative, rock-solid southern New Mexico that have friends and relatives. They're on a registry. Don't tell them I told you that, but go see them. So many times you'll pick up clues when you're talking to these folks. I got a bill sponsored for the Department of Corrections and Parole Board, and the trail just led right to the ultimate sponsor. Oh, you need to talk to this guy. And they narrowed it down for me and got me right there. So you'll get a lot of information. You may have lawmakers that are virulently opposed to sex offender legislation and have been in there 15 or 20 years, because usually those that are opposed to it had to have been there a while, because number one, they have to know the facts. They have to know about this crisis. And the other thing, they have to have enough seniority that they're not worried about getting reelected. So you'll learn a lot just by talking to these folks, and many times they have good advice. Legislative committee hearings, you must be present in and testify at every single committee meeting. Provide handouts for committee meetings in advance. I'll tell you, rarely do they look at these handouts, but it also depends. If they have 12, usually 50 or 60 bills on the agenda for that night, and there's some boring thing about insurance bonding that they're sitting there for hours on, then if you have some handouts there and they're in their books, they may actually start to read those a little bit. So there is a chance that they will get read. Sometimes I just use it for shock and awe. One time we had a pile between all the different lobbyists that was about this high on the front desk, and the committee chair said, "What is all this?" And the aide said, "Oh, that's all for one bill. That's for that sex offender bill, SB 53." So, all for one bill, and that made an impression, and that bill died there. So, again, because they're like so scared of it, they don't even want to mess with it at that point. So, rules vary. I take up stuff and I set it on the front table. But many times it has to be approved by the council service or the chair, or even sometimes the bill sponsor, depending upon the rules in your state. So you really need to go to the aides for that committee and find out. And sometimes you have to give it out 24 hours in advance. Now, if the bill is held over on a schedule, typically that stuff will stay with them. It'll come back each time. So once you've got it in there, you've got it in there. Coordinate different lobbyists speaking on different points. A lot of times we'll meet out in the hall and say, ACLU, what are you going to speak about? Well, we're going to speak about retroactivity. Okay, all right. NMCDLA, what are you going to speak about? Well, we're going to speak about these 3 court cases that came. Okay. RSL New Mexico. Okay, well, we've got 4 guys. Alice, what are you going to speak about? Well, I'm going to speak about the human toll of all this. And we kind of line it up so everybody's kind of speaking about something a little different. Even though you're preparing talking points for your people, a lot of times I'll prepare a really long list of talking points for them. Obviously, that's not the talking points I give to the lawmaker, but I want them to be able to select and pick and choose from those talking points. So it doesn't sound like there's nothing worse than you see an organized effort and there's 75 people in there that all stand up and say the same exact thing. That doesn't work so well. That's kind of like the form letter. You want everybody kind of to talk a little bit about something different. Of course, have your complete factual and legal analysis. Work with key players in your state to reach acceptable legislation compromise and wording, as we've mentioned. Committee hearings continued. Quick emails indicating your support or lack of support and the reasons. Do speak with aides and staff members. If your elected official holds public meeting, attend those public meetings. Keep a consistent presence throughout calling, emailing, and sending letters. And again, we talked about the importance of momentum. So if you're trying to kill a bill, you want it to not have momentum. Other techniques: write letters to the editor of your local newspaper expressing your position on a bill. Again, that's a double-edged sword. A lot of times newspapers and such will come to us for comments, and that's more often than not when we use the media, because don't hide. Don't say, oh, I'm not talking to you, because that will make things worse. Somebody needs to be a point man in your organization for the media. I do it now, even as a registrant. I typically recommend as a registrant you don't do it. I got tired of stupid people talking to the media because that will cost you. So I talk to the media, and the coverage has gotten better. Get other interest groups or stakeholders involved, as well as talking to the groups that are proposing this legislation. Make controversy, protests, and petitions. Protests and petitions, useless. I see this every day online, on SOSN particularly. Well, let's do another petition. Oh, whoa, we get 500 people on a petition and we send it to Congress. What do they care? If we could get 10 million to sign a petition, sure, but we can't. If we could get 500 people to show up at the Missouri Capitol and a rally, okay. Can we? No, we can't. So they're a waste of time, to be perfectly honest. And I know people disagree with me on it, but it really is true. Donating to campaigns, yes, donating to campaigns works. And unlike you heard, it doesn't take much money. $100, $200 is sometimes all it takes at the state level. Or federal level, it takes a lot more than that. But at the state level, $100, $200, and they will remember that. So something that we all need to work better on, I know, including our state. PACs, which is not something we really worry about, or we really use because it costs money. Ineffective techniques: threatening not to vote for them the next legislation. I think, as you heard, getting pissed off doesn't do a whole lot of good either. Gift giving, gratuities, and many times there's limits to those. Those are the limits in New Mexico. Exaggerating or overstating your position is not helpful. And if there's no reliable data to be found, or if you don't know the answer to the question, let them know that. Don't BS your way through it if you can't. We want to always be on the right side of the issue, and we always want to be the people with the facts and the data, and we want to be the folks that are honest. So if you don't know the answer, let them know and get back to them. Over-focusing on statistical data and support your position, you got to use emotion. You got to use the Constitution. You got to use morality. You got to use all the spectrum of things. Over-focusing on recidivism is not a recipe for success. Over-focusing on the tree instead of forest, where it's not looking at the big picture. Pre-written position letters. Obviously, individual letters are best. Comments on relationships. Successful lobbying hinges on your reputation and your relationships with all the contributing parties to the legislative process. They need to know you're serious. They need to know you're smart. They need to know you're honest, reliable. They need to know you're going to be there. You're not going to give up. And sex offenders can lobby. I mean, you can be, just because you did something wrong 25 years ago doesn't mean that you can't be a part of this. You must build your own relationships with key lawmakers and their staff. Keep in mind that the governor and the attorney general's office obviously many times control the agenda. I mean, many times they're the ones asking for these laws. Make a point of thanking legislators for their time. Facts are important, but motion and sincerity seal the deal. The last thing I had in here, and this was just simply left in here from my prior proposals, do you need a professional lobbyist? One thing about this movement is we have to become more professional, and one of the things we're going to have to do is start raising money to hire lawyers to run litigation that will make lawmakers do the right thing. And for some affiliates, it may be you need to consider some point down the road hiring a lobbyist at some level, particularly if you're going to sponsor legislation. I know Missouri apparently has done this at least already at one point. There can be a lot of benefits. I mean, it could really jump your movement ahead, but you got to raise money. You got to get those folks out there to skip a trip to Wendy's once a month and donate $5 a month. Get 1,000 people on the registry donating $5 a month, that's $5,000 a month. So you have to ask yourself, does someone in my organization have the talents and connections? Does anyone in my organization possess the time to devote? Because we've already talked about how much time this takes. I mean, 80 hours during session for me is easy, and I have a small, short legislature. Does your organization wish to draft and sponsor legislation? If the answer is yes, then you really may need a lobbyist. And I will tell you there are lobbyists out there in the sex offender movement that will work a lot cheaper too. So there are options potentially out there. Selecting a lobbyist, an ethical one that follows the rules. Look out for big promises, the good old boys. That, I was a lawmaker for 82 years, and I'll just say word one to somebody and it'll get done. Those big promises seem to fall through quite a bit. Part of it is to do with the fact that some of the ways they used to do things are now illegal. Here, $100, homeboy, go do. That doesn't work anymore as much. And in New Mexico, a lot of them have gone to jail lately. So, personality, do you get along with them? Do you think they're going to address your issue? With the right personality. Conflict with your mission or beliefs. You probably wouldn't want to hire somebody that lobbies for Knick-Knack to lobby for you, as an example. If you're the lung association, you probably don't want to hire the tobacco lobbyist. And of course, cost is a huge issue. If you're going to work with a lobbyist, and this is key if you have your own, even if it's just your head person here, there has to be a single person with the responsibility to make decisions. I got a call here the last session at 12:30 a.m. from somebody that was up there because I had been up there for 24 hours prior and was exhausted. He said, I'm in the hallway. We've got a deal. Is it okay to proceed? I can't go and caucus. I can't call up and have a conference call with my board of directors. There has to be somebody there that can make a decision that quick. It's scary. You have to trust somebody, though. Close working relationship with your lobbyists. Expect regular reporting. Work out strategy together and determine, obviously, the extent of the representation. So that's my presentation. I'll take a few questions and answers, and then we'll take a look at some other things. Go ahead.
You made a comment earlier about how it is, not just about public safety, but also victims' rights. My daughter was a victim of sexual assault, and she's concerned about her rights as well, and how they impact her right to privacy. How does that, can you comment on that?
Well, yeah, it's a tough one. One thing is that the victims have a say, in the prosecution and punishment phases of the incident. That's where their say is. Their say should not be in regards to what happens to them after their punishment is done. Because once the punishment is done, you're off probation, you're off parole, that's the end. That's the end of the victim's input. Now that's kind of a cold thing to say sometimes, but that is true. I mean, at that point, their input, should end. But it's also important, I think, to point out how victims are impacted through re-victimization, or through you reintegrate a kid back into the family, and their family's name appears on the registry. And that kid's, 8, 10 years old, and they're going to go through the next 10 years of school with their dad on the registry and that victim's last name on the registry. There are many ways that these laws impact victims. Lack of reporting because people are afraid of what's going to happen to their loved one. So it's important to point out that these laws do hurt victims indeed too.
Really, two questions. When you have coffee or lunch with these legislators, do you offer to buy? And two is there any benefit in pointing out that, we're singling out sex offenders and there's no list of murderers or drug dealers or spouse abusers out there?
On the first question, yeah, typically I do offer, and a lot of lawmakers do expect you to buy lunch or dinner, or coffee or whatever it is. I will say that because of the increasing strict lobbying laws in many states, and because of some of the hysteria there, sometimes they will say, no, I got it. And that's more because they just want any look of impropriety. But make the offer, and someone will expect you to pay. And then on the, what was the other question? I'm sorry.
We're getting all these lists of sex offenders,
Oh, yes.
but the murderers, the drug dealers, that kind of thing.
I say no, because we want to come from we want to be on the moral high ground. And we know those lists wouldn't work. We know those lists would result in the same constitutional or moral violations, that they would not be effective criminal justice prevention. I mean, murderers have less of a recidivism rate than we do. Now, part of that's because they're locked up for so long. But the point is, I know right offhand that what I would be saying, I don't believe in. We're kind of using that as, I understand the context of why we use that. Well, why not these guys? Why are you attacking us? I don't think that's a good argument. That's just me.
I just want to comment some more on what he said of it. Well, we do have a child abuse registry and a abuse of adult dependent, and those are on the same civil guidelines as the sex offender registry, but those two other registries don't have the restrictions. And I think that would be an argument that should be brought up as well, to say, as far as the stipulations on sex offender registries as being punitive when you have these other two registries that are on the same civil principles as the sex offender registry but don't have those restrictions. But I also agree that, as a point to making a registry, not that I really want to see those registries, but just as a point to make to lawmakers about, other crimes, theft, burglary, other assaults, domestic assaults, or stuff like that. Just kind of, I don't know what I'm saying. I know what I'm saying, but just to point out, what if you were to impose certain restrictions on these types of offenders? And right, if we allow restrictions to be put on one certain registry, yeah, where does it end? And I guess I'll be done for that one.
Well, it's kind of that, what you're talking about is that
on.
slippery slope. And it seems like that's a little overused, but I think it's very valid. The slippery slope is very valid in many ways.
Sorry, I got a need for some reason or other.
Oh, you don't have a question?
Why did I have to
Go
come
ahead.
up here?
I want to push back a little bit on
Oh,
the issue of arguing that notification increases crime. It does increase non-sexual crime, but there's not a shred of evidence that I've seen that it increases sexual recidivism, because the vast majority of guys who walk out of a sentencing hearing got it right then. And there's nothing that society seems to be able to do to goad them into committing another sex offense. And I think it's a counterproductive argument in that it tends to add weight to the idea that we're dealing with an unstable population who, if you don't treat them just right, might go over the edge at any minute. That's not so. I think it's a not just a weak argument, but a counterproductive argument.
Yeah, and to be clear, usually when I bring that issue up, because there's a lot of good recent studies that show that the registries actually increase crime, but we do need to be a little more specific. There's not a lot of evidence. We know that when folks are sexually stressed, that they do tend to commit sexual crimes, but there's not a lot of data to show that the registry is causing an increase in sexual crime, but non-sexual crimes, burglary, other things just to survive are increasing. So it's important to make that differentiation that, you know, these guys aren't, like you said, out there being unstable and committing more sex crimes, and we need to crack down on more, but they're committing other types of crimes. And so that's you know, that's an important aspect of that. And the idea that there are other, you know, that crime isn't being prevented either, you know, and that we're actually, by scaring people away from reporting and things like that, we're increasing victimization.
How much of your group's total energy and time goes into lobbying and lobbying-related activities?
That's a very good question. Probably 70 to 80%, probably. You know, during legislative session, it's 100%. We shut everything down in December, and we don't do a single thing other than have meetings and do lobbying until our legislative session ends, typically in March. So, and then we look at other things after that. Like we start planning for the 2012 conference. We start that in April. Just a couple real quick things. I had a handout there. There's a thing called Theories of Persuasion and Principles of Effective Lobbying that you're welcome to look at. I'd also include some workshop sheets, but we lost about 15 minutes in the beginning because of the last overrun, so we didn't really get into that. But you still look through those worksheets and use the same principle to take a look at bills that you either failed to kill or you did, and really analyze what were the causes, what were the reasons, what did you do right, what did you do wrong, and that was kind of the workshop component that we didn't get to. But I will say in 2012, we're going to do a lot more detailed things, a little bit longer workshops, and we'll be able to get into some of those nuts and bolts a little bit more. So thanks a lot, guys.